The next Lee and Ian podcast is approaching the station. Please step aside.
And I am Lee Navin, and once again, I am joined by a man who needs no introduction.
I need an introduction.
You do need an introduction,
yes,
actually.
Please.
That's right.
Please.
Say hello to Ian Grodman, who needs no introduction again, but he says he does, so I'm going to introduce him.
I need an introduction. Thank you, Lee.
And Ian, I'm Lee Navlin, as you know.
Yeah,
right?
I do know that. You don't need an introduction.
That's right. I don't need an introduction. That's right, because no one cares who I am. Ian, right? but we have a very special guest in studio, Ian.
Yes, we do.
We heard her at the top of the introduction. She is the voice of the New York City subway. She is also a legendary voice on New York radio. Please, ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Bernie Wagenblast.
Thank you so much.
Welcome, Bernie.
Ian. Great to be here.
I am so thrilled that you are here, Bernie. I have been for years and years and years, back in the day when I used to commute into the city, I would listen to you tell me what highway to avoid, what tunnel to avoid, what bridge to avoid, and I tell you what, you got me in and out of the city so many millions of times, and now, if I'm on the subway, there's a good chance you're going to tell me to watch out, the subway's arriving. You're going to tell me to step back. So anyway.
Or the train is coming in 2 minutes.
Yes.
The train is coming in 2 minutes. And that's, now you do all that live, right, on the subway?
Oh, yeah. I work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It's a grueling schedule. But, if you could excuse me for I think there is a one train approaching.
No.
The next downtown 1 is approaching the station. Please stand away from the platform edge.
Okay, we can go back.
And by the way, I don't stand back. When you say that, I step forward. That's how I roll in the subway. You know, like no one's going to tell me, right? You know? But Bernie, now I want to talk about your whole career. I want to talk about everything you've accomplished. As I said, you're a legend. But you did make headlines a couple years ago because of a very personal decision in your life. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. 2 years ago, I came out as a transgender woman. It was something that I've known about myself from my earliest memories. So this was not some revelation that suddenly came along, but I had reached the point where I felt it was possible and necessary for me to start living on the outside how I've always felt on the inside. So I made that decision. I like to be exact with things, so I picked January 1st, 2023 to be the time that I would socially transition. And since that time, I've been living and presenting as the gender I've always felt myself to be, female.
Now, Bernie, professionally speaking, you have what they call the golden pipes, okay, as a radio broadcaster. And I broke into radio many, many moons ago up in Hartford, Connecticut, and I don't have the pipes. I had a little bit of a delivery that they liked, but you have the golden pipe. So I would imagine when you said to colleagues, let's say, what your decision was. Maybe it came as a little bit of a shock just because of your voice and your voice of God, so to speak, which you really do have. I mean, talk a little bit about how that. What did people say? First of all, what did your colleagues say, and then friends, family, so forth? Maybe a little background on that.
The support I have received has been astounding, particularly from my professional colleagues. I live in two worlds, transportation and radio. And in both fields, the people there have been 100% supportive of me, which has felt wonderful. I guess, nobody said to me, "Oh, I can't believe this. This is a shock." There were people, when you tell somebody, when you come out, it's usually a process. It's not just some grand announcement to the whole world all at once. You start with family telling them, and then you go to your close friends and colleagues that you're working with. I liken it to if you throw a pebble in a still brook, you see those concentric circles that come out from where the pebble landed. That's kind of how I approached my coming out. That first circle is family. The next one are close friends, then colleagues, etc. And then finally, the world. Right before January 1st of 2023, I posted on social media for anyone who didn't know that this was going to be happening as of January 1st. So that was the final circle, if you will, that I was telling.
Well, amazing. So basically, it starts with your wife and your children, I guess. And now, your wife, did she understand this was something that was inside of you that I mean, she must have. No one knows you better than your spouse.
Well, a couple of things. I told my future wife before I asked her to marry me that this was something I always felt about myself. I've known that I've been trans from my earliest memories.
Okay.
So this was something that was known by me, and I felt that if I was going to ask this woman to marry me, she needed to know this part of me.
That was courageous. That was a courageous moment because that was
Absolutely.
not to age you, but I know you're about my age, and
This was 1980.
okay.
Yeah.
Right. So that was an interesting time to say I have to have a conversation with you about something that's really personal.
And the word transgender wasn't part of most people's vocabulary back then, including mine. So I had just told her that I'd always wished that I had been female. But again, 1980, there was no way I could anticipate that I would ever transition. I did not see that as something that would be viable any part of my future. So that was the understanding. Many years later, once my kids were adults and married, I told all of them and their spouses, and they have been supportive. My wife and I are separated. I try generally not to talk too much about them because they're more private people than I am, and I don't want to invade their privacy or speak for them. So that's kind of where I leave it when it comes to family.
Right? No, 100%. Wagenblast. Where'd that name come from? Because it's a name that I've known you just from radio forever because of the last name. Was that your dad's name?
Yes, it's a German name. My ancestors came to the United States around the 1850s. So I've lost all connection with the old country. Although the first time I went to Germany in 1980, I picked up a phone book when they still had phone books and looked up Wagenblast. And unlike the United States where you don't see too many Wagenblasts in the phone directory, there were quite a few Wagenblasts in the German phone directory.
Okay,
so,
okay, right. You're like, I'm home. I'm
yeah.
home. Yes.
I think it will mean a lot to a lot of our listeners in Maplewood and South Orange that you've come on the broadcast today and that you're willing to share your experiences. If maybe we could talk a little bit about, if you're comfortable talking about what the political climate is right now and what that means for people who are transgender, people in the LGBT community generally. I think that would be really helpful if you're comfortable talking about that. If we could talk to you a little bit about that today. Yeah.
Sure.
Because
And
we have so many young families with young kids, and they just don't know what to do. A friend of mine, she's a psychologist, and these are kids that are coming to her, and because they see other children and they see other families, that they're more comfortable with talking to her about it. But recommendations for families dealing with this?
That's a great one.
I'd start with, if your child comes to you and shares with them that they are gender nonconforming, using that as sort of a wider umbrella,
Right.
because it might be non-binary, there are variations. Don't expect yourself to have all the answers right away. That's the first part of it. But let your child know that you love them, that you support them, and that together you will work out how to deal with this. That is, I think, the most important thing. When I was growing up in the 1960s and 70s, this was really, for the most part, unheard of. And I regret that I never shared with my parents how I felt. I believe they would have been very supportive because I think they saw some hints along the way and maybe suspected something, but I never blatantly came out and told them about myself. And the fact that when they saw some of these hints, they did not get mad at me or call me any names or anything like that really made me feel much safer given those times. But that's still true. Your kids look to their parents as the people that are there to protect them and support them. So that is absolutely the first thing. The second thing is, once they tell you that information, look for sources of reliable information to learn. And information obviously can vary, and it constantly is changing. But if you can go to people that you feel are reliable sources of information, a librarian is a good place to start. There are numerous organizations in New Jersey and New York City that can be sources of reliable information to find out so you know more and try to understand this. Obviously, therapists can play a big role. You know, there's been a lot of unfortunate talk during the election and since that minors are just going in and having surgeries and things like that. That does not happen.
Nope.
And that's the misinformation that is out there. So getting that reliable information gives you a better basis for being able to provide help to your child. So those are some of the things that I would suggest.
Bernie, can I ask, are there organizations in New Jersey that you could mention that, for instance, a parent is dealing with concerns about their children, maybe transgender or gender non-binary, or their children have come to them to talk to them about this and they don't know how to handle it? Are there organizations in New Jersey that you could recommend that they take a look at?
There are some ones that come to mind. I'm sure that I'm going to miss some,
Right.
But among them, more from a medical standpoint, RWJ Barnabas has what they call the Babs Sipperstein Center
Sure.
at RWJ Somerset, which is in Somerville. So that's one place that you can start. Another place are advocacy organizations, like out in Montclair, for example, the Pride Center of New Jersey, which is in Highland Park. Those are places that you can go to. And they can also direct you to other sources of information as well.
Right. That's great. Thank you.
So what I find fascinating, Bernie, is you had these feelings as a child. You didn't discuss with your parents. It was a different time. You end up becoming highly successful in a very challenging career. And again, it didn't hold you back. It's just these feelings didn't hold you back. These families, my child, is this going to ruin their life? Are they not going to be professionally successful? Words of wisdom or encouragement or whatnot for these families about?
Sure. Well, for me, just to back up a little, I knew from about 5th grade that I wanted to work in radio. And I really put my heart and soul into preparing myself for a career in radio. And I would go downstairs reading out loud the late lamented Star Ledger in my basement just to practice getting my voice. I went to Seton Hall University here in South Orange and was very involved with the college radio station there, WSOU. So
your bag is a WSOU bag, right?
Exactly.
Yes,
Shout out to Seton Hall University.
And I think focusing on that provided a distraction for me, something else that I could focus on, because this is not an exaggeration. I don't think there was 1 hour of my awake life from teenager on that I did not think about being trans at least once during that hour. That's how pervasive this was to me. This was something that was constantly on my mind. And I was extremely fortunate. Not that, I didn't have some talent, but I happened to be in the right place at the right time. About a year after I graduated, this new company came to New York called Shadow Traffic. And I was hired as one of the original on-air Shadow Traffic reporters.
Now, they were based out of Union, am I correct?
At the time, yes. They were based in Union. And it was a lot of us were from Seton Hall University. And here I was at 23 years old.
Wow.
On the air in the largest market in the country. Not just on the air in the largest market, but on the air during drive time, which is the most listened to time of day for radio. And I was doing traffic reports with the legendary DJ Dan Ingram on WABC,
Wow.
doing traffic on 1010 Winds, the all-news radio station. And you had literally millions of people that would be hearing you every day. And to have that kind of success as a 23-year-old was pretty mind-blowing.
Sure, right. All of a sudden, these guys you grew up listening to are talking to you.
Yeah,
right? And
exactly.
They're tossing to you.
Yep.
Yeah, that had to be... Now, Shadow Traffic, I believe, my understanding is it existed elsewhere in the country, or was it founded in the tri-state area?
It was founded in Philadelphia.
Okay.
And then it later expanded to Chicago, and New York was the 3rd city that they came to.
Right.
So that we were the third city and, of course, the biggest market.
Right.
Yeah, and shadow traffic would basically, so you like different stations would take your report. So you might be on 1010 Winds and then WCBS Radio maybe next.
Well, probably not that because they would be competitors, so they
Right.
wouldn't want the
Okay.
same person.
But you said WABC, which in the
Right.
60s and 70s, right?
Yeah.
So that's a very challenging. So you would do a traffic report for one station, okay, and then you would go to do the traffic report for the next station. Would it be the same traffic report, or would you have to rewrite every traffic report?
No, and it wasn't written. You had to do it extemporaneously from
Wow.
notes.
Yeah.
So if I was doing a New York City station, you're covering the tri-state area. But then 2 minutes later, I'm doing WMTR in Morristown, so you're covering North Jersey. And then a few minutes later, you're in Westchester County or on Long Island. So you constantly are doing the report for that area. And to this day, I could still do traffic on the BQE, moving well if you're traveling southbound, but we've got some delays northbound up toward the Kosciuszko Bridge. Inbound at the Lincoln Tunnel, it's a 15-minute delay. Holland Tunnel, 10 minutes. George Washington Bridge, the upper level will be your best bet. That's Shadow Traffic. I'm Bernie Wagenblast on 1010 Winds.
That's amazing. That's amazing. you must be in the middle of the night sleeping and just thinking about
In your dreams.
when they
right? Yes.
rename bridges, the Mario Cuomo Bridge. Is this kind of like?
Oh, that's a hot topic. That you'll still hear it referred to on the air as the Tappan Zee Bridge.
Yes.
They may have changed the name officially, and it varies. For instance, the Interborough Parkway became Jackie Robinson Parkway.
Right.
Traffic reporters will call it Jackie Robinson. The Triborough Bridge became the RFK Bridge. So they now do sort of a hybrid, the RFK Triborough Bridge, they'll call it. But they won't call the Queensboro Bridge the Edward I. Koch Bridge because I guess it just doesn't roll off your tongue quite so easily.
So I guess my next question. Well, first off, I just want everybody to know because we mentioned Seton Hall a little earlier. In 2016, you were inducted into WSOU's Hall of Fame. So this.
Wow.
I didn't realize we had a Seton Hall legend also.
I didn't know that until she got here today.
On the broadcast. And 1010 Wins. I'd be if I didn't mention my buddy Bob Lemulik, who was a voice on 1010 Wins for many years. And anyway, he's listening to the podcast. I hope. Bob, be able to
Hey there,
support.
Bob.
But anyway, this is just a hello, Bob. Yes, hello to Bob. So what did the subway? How did that all come together?
Well, I had thought that Shadow Traffic was just going to be a radio gig, and then I would be going on to other radio gigs. Turns out it was my introduction to the world of transportation. And after I left Shadow, with a stop or two in between, I ended up working in the public sector. First, briefly for the New York City Department of Transportation, and then for about 10 years for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey with an organization they had created called Transcom. And Transcom's role was to coordinate information among all the different transportation agencies in the tri-state area. And one of the member agencies, as you might guess, was the MTA. So I got to know some folks from the MTA. After I had left Transcom a number of years after
Now, this
I
wasn't
left,
in the broadcasting. You weren't doing broadcasting.
Oh, no,
You're
no,
right. Okay,
no. This
yeah.
was all interagency communication,
Regular
things of
work.
that sort.
Regular work.
So we were doing that, and one of our member agencies was the MTA, and many years later, a guy who I had known from Transcom at the MTA reached out to me and said, hey, we're doing this new project where we're going to have a voice announcing when the trains are arriving.
Yeah.
Would you be interested in being that voice? And I said, sure. I love transportation. I like using my voice. I would be more than happy to do that. So we went into a studio for 2 days, probably did about 1,000 individual recordings or so.
Wow. Okay, so
And-
it's the 1-9 train, the 2 whatnot, the N train.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's why when you listen to the announcements, they sound staccato because the computer is piecing together all these
Very
little
interesting.
recordings. So the next, uptown, downtown, Bronx bound. It could be all these different words or set brief phrases that get put in. My longest phrase is please stand away from the platform edge. But, everything else is just a little recording that is put together.
Very interesting.
So that was how that all came about.
Now, I'm sure that was as fascinating and as fun as you could possibly imagine, spending hours and hours of recording these little snippets.
Yeah, my eyes started to get a little cross-eyed, especially when we were doing the ordinal numbers. So first, second, and then, 225th, 226. You know, okay. Did I say? I forget. Did I say that right?
So are you brought in occasionally to update it, or?
I've had 2 brief recording sessions since those big recording sessions in 2009, where we had to do some new announcements because either names of stations had changed. For instance, what was Shea Stadium obviously no longer exists, so we had to re-record and call it Mets Willets Point. So things like that, or some news stations that came online, like 34th Street Hudson Yards. It was a news station that didn't exist when I did those original recordings. So things like that have come up, but those are usually pretty brief. And I should also mention, it's not just the New York City subway. Here in New Jersey, I am the voice of the air train at Newark Liberty International Airport.
Wow.
So when you're on the air train and you hear,
The next stop is Terminal B. Airlines serving Terminal B are Air France, Air India, and so on and so forth.
Right. That's So Ian, what do you think of that? So now you got a reason to take the air. Do you take the air train, Ian? I'm not even sure. I think Ian's more like an Uber guy. I don't know. It just strikes me as.
I usually get a family member to drive me to the airport, but I have taken the air train a number of times. And now that you're saying, you know, Terminal B, I know that voice. Yeah.
I picked Ian up a few years ago when he was flying back from Rome, and I picked him up, and he said, "Oh, just landed. I'll be out in 10 minutes." 45 minutes later, Ian calls me back. I'll be out in 10 minutes. 45 minutes later.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Lee. I'm forever indebted to you. That's why I'm on the show with you.
So I felt this was an opportunity to finally gripe about that. And,
I'm sorry.
I was like, what, does he have a watch on him? How can you not know that 45
They wouldn't let me off the plane.
That's what I'm thinking. They're not letting him. Right. Well, why did he try to sneak into the country? Right.
It wasn't my fault.
Well, he's an immigration attorney. I figured he probably.
That's it.
Probably said something he shouldn't have. But it's so almost like a Saturday Night Live skit. I imagine you taking a subway and you hear your voice and then you tapping someone on the shoulder. That's me. Have you done that?
well, I haven't done that quite, but I was on the subway, for instance, just this most recent Saturday night with a friend going to see a show, and my voice came on the loudspeaker, and I'm imitating myself standing next to her, not for everybody else to hear, but just, you know, I said, you get to hear it in stereo.
Yeah. Now, it's because, Bernie, you're a woman. You certainly look like a woman. The voice is the voice. I said, you know, I mean, you could be doing the Yankee Stadium, you're now batting, you know, the center fielder. I mean, so that maybe there's a TikTok. I don't know if you're on TikTok. Like, there's some type of comedic, you know, you got your friend with the camera rolling.
It could be.
It's like, hey, that's me. And someone's like, yeah, that's you. And then you bang out the voice. You know, so what do you think, Ian? Your son has a camera. He has a camera.
That's true. That's true. My son does a lot of video work and photography, and you know, he'd be happy to help you if you're interested in that.
All right.
Yeah, so
Practical Jokers are one of those type shows.
He's a little bit of a practical joker, not as much as Lee's son, but yeah.
Right. My son. So the three of us, I tell you, we could take TikTok by storm. I think this is. I think we're done with these podcasts. We're on the bigger and better.
On to the next.
Let's be viral.
That's it. Let's be viral. Yes. Yeah.
That's right. So amazing. But so you're not currently doing traffic reports right now. You were talking a little bit earlier how that just retired basically.
I had kept my hand in radio because my first love, as far as a career, was radio. So I wanted to keep on doing that. And I was just doing a 4-hour shift on a Saturday just to keep my hand in radio. But it finally got to the point where all of the reports were pre-recorded. And to me, as someone who grew up with radio where things were live, that didn't feel like radio any longer. So I said, this is a good time to call it quits and retire from that part of my life.
But I think you said also you still do a local radio show to Cranford, and you still work on transportation issues. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Again, because of my love of radio, I call it Cranford Radio, but it's really a podcast, very much like this, where I interview a wide variety of folks from town. They could be politicians, business people, clergy, you name it, sort of in all things considered, but just about Cranford.
Very good.
And that I've been doing since 2014. Professionally, I do a couple of podcasts for clients. about transportation-related issues. So talking with transportation professionals from around the country and even sometimes around the world, where we'll talk about different issues that affect transportation. Transportation is one of those things that impacts almost everyone.
Yep.
So
Especially
there's
in
a
New
lot
Jersey.
of things.
Now, is shadow traffic still in existence right now?
Not under that name.
Okay.
There have been a lot of companies, there have been mergers and acquisitions
Sure.
and such. So today it goes by what once was Shadow Traffic, goes by the name of Total Traffic and Weather, and it's owned by iHeart, which is the largest owner of radio stations in the United States.
Sure. So that industry has changed. Traffic reports, I mean, are they still as well, I mean, obviously everyone's got Waze and this and that. So what's happened to traffic reports, that industry?
It has contracted significantly, unfortunately. When I started in 1979, virtually every New York area radio station was doing something with traffic. That's why we were on so many radio stations, because that was how you found traffic. There was no Waze or Google Maps to
Right.
get you where you were going. So you would turn on the radio and you would hear those traffic reports. There are still some radio stations that are doing traffic, most notably, I'd say, in New York, 1010 Winds. But there's not the demand for it. You know, 1010 Winds, I've heard it described by people who have worked there as a utility. It's like an information utility. You turn it on, you get your headlines, the weather, the traffic, sports headlines, things of that sort. And that's what they're there for. But if you're a music station, you don't necessarily want to interrupt
Right.
the flow of music by putting in a traffic report. So it's far less of a service than it once was.
Right, because years ago, I remember one time I'm in the car. I think my wife was in the car. My mother's in the car. We were driving into the city, and I remember this specifically. Traffic was 5 o'clock, and I'm trying to figure out, do I take the Holland or take the Lincoln to get in? And sure enough, finally the report comes on. It's probably you. And all of a sudden, my mother's in the back seat, and she's mad about something, and all of a sudden she's like, I'm not happy that we got to go into this is really aggravating me.
The
I
apple
go,
doesn't fall far from the tree.
That's right. And I'm like, I got to hear the traffic report. So I turned the traffic report up louder. You know, and she turned the radio down. It's too loud. Well, I got to scream over this. You know, so my wife is telling my mother, Mr. Traffic Report.
You gotta wait 10 minutes now.
Right, that's right. By that point, it was too late because, I had to already have picked one tunnel or the other. So 2 hours of tunnel traffic in the Holland. Just to hear you go, and Lincoln's running smoothly. But no, once upon a time, you changed lives. I mean, you really
That's
did.
true.
If you told somebody
That's
to
true.
avoid the GW,
And we would see, because it wasn't just me, obviously, there were a number of other traffic reporters on different stations. You could actually see how traffic would switch from one place to another as we talked about what the conditions were like. So it was very interesting to have that kind of an impact on the public.
Sure.
and I know the traffic reports would often say, hey, if you see something, you reach out. I know there was over the years, maybe it was a phone number once upon a time. Love, hate? Did you get more love or hate, from...
Well, as an on-air reporter, I usually did not answer those calls. There were people out at
Right.
the desk who
Right,
would
yeah.
answer those.
Yep.
But you would get people, why aren't you talking about this or why aren't you talking about that? And if you're doing a station like 1010 Winds or the late WCBS 880,
Yeah.
you are covering the entire tri-state area. So you can't necessarily mention everything in every report, especially if it's a busy day. So you are going to miss things, and it's like triage with a hospital. You're going to talk about the worst of the worst. You're not going to necessarily talk about a stalled car that's causing a half-mile slowdown because you've got bigger fish to fry with the overturned tractor trailer on the LIE. So
WCBS Radio. Yeah, that hurt when they folded. That just to me was like even like the Star Ledger a couple days ago.
Yeah.
They're not going to be
Just this week.
right. I just you just things WCBS Radio that can never go anywhere. Little sad the state of radio today, and
yes, for me, very sad. I think any of us who have worked in the business during what was a golden age for radio, when that was the way you listened to music and got information, feel sad about how things have changed. I feel, even though I never worked in the newspaper business, I'm very sad to see the print edition of the Star Ledger disappear. Unfortunately, in its last years, it was nothing like it once was back before
Right.
the internet. But those things are all sad. But, I imagine blacksmiths were sad when they saw
That's
cars
true.
come along
That's
and
true.
horses were
Yeah,
not
yeah,
getting
there we go.
shoes.
Like, what's
Yeah.
that thing? It's got an engine. Does it have legs? You're going to be out of work soon. But it's the changes. I mean, there's still sports radio, but now a lot of these, like Mike Francesa, now he's got a podcast. I mean, is radio, satellite radio? Where do you see free radio in 10 years?
I think radio will still be around. I think part of the problem isn't just all the new technology that's come along, but the consolidation. It used to be that if you were a company, you could own an AM station and an FM station in the city. And they relaxed, I should say, those rules where now you've got single companies that own multiple radio stations. So it kind of takes away from the competition. And there are economies of scale, obviously, but I think you lose something. When you own multiple music radio stations in the same city, WCBS and 1010 Winds were both owned first by CBS Radio, and then they sold it to Odyssey. So they were owned by the same company, and each had a different approach. I personally, even though I was on 1010 Winds, I always liked WCBS better. It was more conversational. It was not so much the crime stories always headlining the news.
Yeah.
I liked their approach to doing radio news better. But those things, unfortunately, have changed, and because of the economies of scale, now it's a little bit different here in New York because, again, we're the biggest market. But if you're in Des Moines or Omaha, you may be hearing somebody who's on the air and they're actually broadcasting to you from Los Angeles or Chicago because they can, with technology, do all that remotely these days. So that's changed. And most recently, I did something on my own podcast with this just to show what it's like. There's an experimental program that Google does called Notebook NL. And you can upload YouTube videos, PDFs, newspaper articles to this. And it creates a podcast with two hosts, one male sounding, the other female sounding. They're AI. And it sounds remarkably like real human beings. And they talk about whatever you've uploaded into the system.
Right.
And because I know this subject better than any other, I uploaded some stuff about myself.
Yeah.
And it was amazing what they
Wow.
did. It just blew me away. It's scary and amazing all at the same time.
Yeah.
I was just playing around with AI recently. I just put a couple. I had an idea for. I wrote a book, Secretary of the City, by the way, which Ian I know read.
It's a great book.
Bernie, you reached out to me shortly after because one of the characters in the book is supposed to be a reporter at 1010 Winds.
Oh.
And you actually said to me, you said, "Hey, if you need another radio personality, remember Bernie." So
Great
you did-
synergy here.
Right, you did say that. I really appreciate that. But I have been playing around with the second book. I goofed around, so I threw like a couple things about the book and maybe the new plot, and I threw it into an AI thing, and it within 5 seconds had about 1,000 words on potentially. Now I'm not going to use it as it was not where I'm going, but anyway, I mean it was something that might have taken me 2 weeks to write.
Right.
It wrote in 5 seconds.
Right.
It's amazing. Yeah.
So it's a little spooky. But so all that said. Kid walks in here and says, "Bernie, I'm at WSOU radio right now. I'm going to be in broadcasting. I'm going to be a journalist. I'm going to be on radio, TV, whatever it is." What would your step-by-step advice be for that 18-year-old dreaming kid of, being heard by millions?
I don't know that I would give step by step because things change so rapidly, but I would give some general advice. I used to say to young people, take advantage of opportunities as they present themselves. Now, I've changed that to make opportunities and create your own opportunities. There have been things that have come along that if I hadn't suggested it, it never would have happened. So that's the first thing that I would suggest. And I would say don't box yourself in. I boxed myself in, and it didn't feel like I was boxing myself in because there were thousands of radio stations around America that I was going to be in radio. But because of all the new technologies and how people serve multiple platforms, do a lot of that. The other thing that I always like to tell young people, do a podcast, be a reporter for your school paper, whatever it may be. Because when you put on that journalism hat, it gives you access to people that you never would have had access to otherwise. When I was an 18-year-old student at Seton Hall, it was 1976 was my junior year, and the presidential election was taking place. I was the news director at WSOU, and it was a hotly contested election, first in the primary between Ronald Reagan and Gerald Ford, and then nationally between Jimmy Carter and Gerald Ford. And the Ford White House, using the power of the incumbency, invited the New Jersey media down to the White House for a day of briefings, capped off by a news conference with President Ford. And believe it or not, they sent a telegram out to the radio station that I was working at part-time since it was the summer. This was for the primary because the Reagan-Ford race was pretty tight. And New Jersey's primary actually made a difference back then, believe it or not. Usually our primary, by that time, they've already figured out who's running.
Right, yeah.
But the news director got it, and she read it and said, we can't afford to send anybody. She ripped it up and put it in the garbage. I put it back together with tape, and I said, tell you what, you give me the day off, I will pay my own way to go down to Washington and cover this for the radio station, as well as my college radio station. So, the money came out of my pocket. I think it was $50 on Braniff Airways to fly to Washington. Well worth the $50 that I spent.
Sure.
And got to do that. And I was in the Blue Room. They were having a little reception. And the President of the United States walks in.
Wow.
And when the President walks into a room, everything changes.
Yeah.
And I got to go up and shake his hand and say, good afternoon, Mr. President. My name is Bernie Wagenblast. Later on, when he was making some campaign stops in New Jersey during the general election, I got to ask him a question at a Air Force One side briefing at Newark Airport. And to do this at 18 or 19 years old was something that I wouldn't have been able to do. But I also did a 45-minute interview with a co-student of Governor Byrne in his private office down at the State House.
Yeah, the great Brendan Byrne.
Exactly. And to do these things that
as a kid,
if I were just a student, I wouldn't have been able to do it. But because I was a journalist, I was able to do those things.
Right.
And so if you put on that hat, it can give you access to people that you might not ever have access to otherwise. So that would be something else I would say to a young person. If, become a journalist, and you can do that in multiple ways.
And you created your opportunities, like you said, right? Yeah.
So you, Ian, were you? Could you 76? Were you? No, you were too young to vote, right?
I was too young to vote, but
you would have voted for Carter, right?
As a 15-year-old, I worked at the Democratic Convention in New York that year.
Okay.
It was very exciting.
I was
on the
there
convention
too.
floor. That's what you were probably reporting.
Yeah.
I was the person, directing people what buses to get on and that kind of thing. But it was a tremendous experience being at that convention.
So I worked a couple conventions at my Fox News time. I was at the convention in New York City when Bush ran 2004, I guess, right? Bush ran for re-election 2004.
Yeah.
That was the one where John McCain got up there and he said, talking about Michael Moore, and he goes, and a disingenuous filmmaker. Michael Moore was there at the convention covering it. I happened to be standing right next to him when everybody looked up at Michael Moore and started booing, and he went like this with an L, like they kind of make a loser symbol to everybody. And I'm standing right next to him watching 20,000 people at Madison Square Garden, 30,000 boo Michael Moore, and I just remember being like, it's not going to get better than this. This is a fly on the wall moment. Even I was covering it, and I was a journalist, and still that moment of just having everybody kind of look in my direction, but even though looking at him,
right.
Yeah, it was that was my convention highlight.
Very cool.
Yes, of my career.
And you never saw that L on somebody's forehead again.
That's right. Yeah. He made Michael Moore. I'll tell you what, man, he was. I said Michael Moore talking to Larry King, and I said Rudy Giuliani came up and he was chatting, and they were, and it's just again fly on the wall type moments where you saw all the different networks, all the the Fox and screaming at each other. They're shaking hands like, hey, best friend. I mean, it's behind the scenes looks a little different than in front of the scenes.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. It's so. Any more questions for? Bernie?
So if we have time,
Yeah,
I'd like to ask, since you mentioned that you have kind of transitioned based on your experience into working a great deal on transportation, right? And one of the things we talked about a little bit earlier was the gubernatorial debate last night, where all the candidates agreed New Jersey Transit has some very serious issues. In your experience and in the areas where you do have some expertise, can you comment on what's going on with New Jersey Transit and what you think may be some options that might be available to make it better?
Well, let me say this first.
Okay.
I wasn't able to watch that debate because I was stuck on a train in Penn Station due to a train that broke down in the tunnel. I don't know if it was an Amtrak train or an NJ Transit train, but all I know is I was there for well over an hour waiting to get back to New Jersey. So
did you tell them who you are? I mean, you know who I am, don't you?
Did you entertain the passengers?
or fake them out like the train is arriving on track 2. Watch everybody go running over.
Right.
I think it's very difficult, operating an agency like that. There are so many moving pieces and pieces that you don't all necessarily have control over. The Northeast Corridor is owned and operated by Amtrak. So most of the trains that are all of the trains that are going to New York from New Jersey are having to be on the Northeast Corridor. And if Amtrak does something wrong, and even I'm not throwing blame on Amtrak because you're talking about tunnels and equipment in some cases that's over 100 years old, that it's going to break down, and without the funding to support that, it's going to be a problem. Now as you go between Newark and Secaucus, you see that new bridge that's being put up over the Hackensack River, which is going to alleviate the need for bridge openings with the drawbridge that they've had there now, which is over 100 years old.
So so boats are going to be able to get under that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So those types of things are certainly improvements. I think one thing, again, being a journalism person or a communications person, that many different agencies, transit, highway, et cetera, could continue to improve upon. They've made great strides, but can continue to improve upon is information and how well they communicate. Because if you know what's going on and have a better idea of what's happening, your anxiety is alleviated. I was hearing announcements from the conductor last night that we're being held at a red signal. First, that was the announcement. We're being held at a red signal. Well, what does this mean? Then we're told that there's a train that's broken down in the tunnel. Okay, well, now I know a little bit more. But what I don't know is, are they sending a rescue engine to push that train out? What's going on? When do they anticipate that it's going to move? And I realize they may not have the answers to those questions, but if that information can get communicated to the people who are waiting on the trains, that makes a world of difference.
Thanks. Now, Bernie, before we go, a documentary just came out about you. Did I not? Am I understanding that? Okay.
Yeah, there have been. The last 2 years have been amazing. The media coverage that I have received has astounded me, and not just New York. I figured that would New York media would be interested, but I've done national stories with the Associated Press, Reuters, Good Morning America. I did a 6-minute piece that I wrote and presented on CBS Mornings, which I couldn't believe I was doing it. The documentary was something that was actually shot last year for the International Day of Transgender Visibility, which is March 31st every year.
Okay.
And that was one piece of a larger campaign called In Transit, where we did some podcasts, where we did some ads that were placed in the Christopher Street subway station in New York, which is obviously an LGBTQ historic site, that area. So that all came out. The video is going to be shown at some film festivals, including the Garden State Film Festival down in Asbury
yeah,
Park.
certainly, yeah.
And one in Cranford as well. So all these things are happening. And this new year of 2025, this seems like, I guess the media, I've done all the media that I can, outside of this podcast until today, I should mention, that now I've been doing some show business stuff. It started last year when I got a call asking me to be part of a album that Lin-Manuel Miranda and Issa Davis were putting together.
All right. That's a call you take.
cool.
Oh, yeah. And so I'm the voice of the train conductor
That's
on that
great.
album, which, I couldn't believe. Here I am in a studio with Lin-Manuel Miranda,
Yeah.
and he's directing me. And, I made a suggestion on a change, and they actually took the suggestion and used that on the album.
Fantastic.
So that was cool. In January, I was called by Paramount Plus to do some lines for a new show that they've got coming out, a comedy with Tracy Morgan.
Nice.
So
yeah.
it's amazing. Again, I've been joking that I have to be wearing long sleeve shirts because you would see all the black and blue marks on my arm from where I've been pinching myself saying, this can't be real, this can't be real.
Right, that's right. So, hey, you made a decision in life, and that was a big decision.
Oh,
and,
yeah, the biggest decision.
It changed so much, but there are great days. It sounds like you're having great days, great days ahead. You know what, challenges in life, and you face them head on, and look what's going on.
That's great.
Your life, it sounds like you couldn't be happier.
Yeah, I would say so. And, it is, where we are right now with the
Yes,
new
thank you.
administration.
Yeah.
There are tremendous new challenges, and there are new ones that seem to be coming out every day.
Yep.
Right.
So, between the time that this is being recorded and when it's released, who
Right.
knows what else is going to come
That's
out.
right.
Right, yes.
And so many anti-trans
Yep.
executive orders and memos from departments and things of that sort. Even not necessarily little things. The State Department page on passports about travel, it used to say advice for LGBTQ travelers.
Right.
Now it's just LGB
Yep.
travelers. They got rid of the T.
Yeah.
The fact that I can't change the gender marker
Yep.
on my passport. Talking about not allowing transgender people to use a restroom with the gender they identify with without it being a crime. And those things are all scary. They're disheartening. I'm older, so I have some perspective, I think.
Right.
But I'm looking back at, growing up as a kid in the 1960s, I remember the civil rights movement. And those leaders of the civil rights movement didn't run away. They confronted those things
Right.
with nonviolent civil disobedience and things of that sort. And I am going to not run away because of what
Good.
somebody is saying that they feel I should do.
I think experience, notoriety, who you are, what you've accomplished. Yes, certainly taking a lead is probably in your wheelhouse.
That's great.
I hope so. I hope, I want to give courage to young trans people.
That's great.
That's important to me, that they see an example of someone who has transitioned and came out of it on the other side.
Right. We want children to be happy. We want children to be happy. We want them to be happy adults. We want them to be successful. And it's important that we all work together to make sure children can be what they are.
I wanted to ask you if you had a message that you wanted to give to people as we close the podcast. I think you just did. But if there's anything else that you would like to add.
Again, just take courage, look to community. I think that's very important. Your trans siblings who are out there, because all of us need each other. None of us can do this by ourselves. We only make up about 1% of the population. So we are an infinitesimally small minority when you look at the whole picture of the United States. And I hope the allies who are listening to this realize the importance of their role, that feeling that we have their Or no, they have our back.
Yes, we do.
We have your back, and in return, you have our back.
Yeah.
And,
Right,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, and by so we're gonna say goodnight, but just one last thing. I know when you pulled up, Ian looked out and he saw you were driving a Prius. All right, so Ian is a Prius driver himself.
I'm
and
a Prius driver as well.
He goes, I think we're gonna be good friends.
It's a great connection. Yes, yeah.
Right, I drive a Jeep, and I'm kind of looked at a little ornery, gas guzzling Jeep. But,
I've got a plug-in Prius, and most recently I looked, I'm averaging, since I bought the car, 404 miles per gallon.
Wow.
So that makes me feel pretty good.
You should feel good. Yes, yeah.
19.9 miles per gallon. my Jeep. Yeah.
Mine is not a plug-in, but 41 miles per gallon. Yeah.
This is a Bernie Sanders sticker on the back, by the way. You'll notice it when you're leaving. Right?
I took it off in a recent accident.
Oh, did it?
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders sticker gone?
It's gone.
Oh, it's gone. That's the only reason I knew it was you when I'd be
That's
driving
right.
by.
Everybody did.
He had the only Prius with a Bernie Sanders
Yeah.
sticker.
Yeah.
Go to Vermont. I'm sure there'd be a lot.
Yes, a lot more in
A couple
Vermont.
times
You're
I
right.
pull up, hey Ian, it wasn't him. You know, I mean,
There's another one with a Bernie Sanders
yeah,
sticker?
what are you doing? But many times it was him. So all right, so ladies and gentlemen, we're going to call it a night. Thanks for the Lee and Ian podcast. And Bernie, thank you so much
Bernie.
for everything. And
This was great, Bernie. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian, Lee. Thank you both.
we'll do it again soon.
That sounds great. Thank
night,
you, everybody.
everybody.